next speaker, I'm thrilled to introduce my longtime friend, Evelyn Lees, who started as an avalanche forecaster for Utah Avalanche Center in 1991. And I love that she says she's never bored. You know, which means that Ev is a lifelong learner, and she's always curious, she's always interested in things. She's done a lot of things in her world, and here's Evelyn to talk about effectively solo and going uphill in the mountains. Ev.
Thanks, Lynn. I'd like to start with two questions to think about, or one question really, is how many of you have ever lost track of your partners in the backcountry? I certainly have, and sometimes it's just for a few minutes. Other times, the whole thing, it goes on longer, and you're shouting, and you're coming up with a plan. Can they be above me, below me, and that sort of thing. But that's a real common thing to have happen in the backcountry. The winter of 2016-17, there were only 12 avalanche fatalities in the US, and that meant some patterns and some surprising things were stuck out. One of them was 4 out of those 12 people were solo when they were killed in avalanches in the backcountry. So that's really 1 out of 3, and that seemed like a huge number. And Mark Staples, myself, and Doug Chabot all kind of noticed this at the same time and decided we really should dig a little deeper and see if that pattern goes back more than 1 or 2 years. So solo avalanche fatalities are pretty easy to see. This was in outside of Canyons Resort in the backcountry a couple winters ago, a pretty tragic solo avalanche fatality. The skier was last seen on top of this hill around 4 o'clock in the afternoon. He was by himself, worked his way down the ridge, and he dropped onto this slope that looks fairly innocuous. You're looking at about half to 2/3 of the slope. He triggered a small avalanche. He was fully buried. He had a beacon, he had an avalon, but he didn't have a partner. So it was a tragic death. It took 48 hours before they found his body, because nobody knew exactly where he was. But then we started finding some incidents like this when we looked at the data, you know, the avalanche accidents on avalanche.org. This was a snowmobiler 2013 in central Utah, and he started out the day with a group of friends, and they were all up canyon, They were all up canyon of this photo, playing on the flats, you know, and jumping on some small side hills. Around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, they realized a member of their party was missing. So they started searching. They worked backwards, and sure enough, they saw a new recent avalanche, guessed he might be in there, and he was dug out dead right about there. So he was with a party of people, but was he alone? You know, was he solo when he died? So when we started looking at all this data, Mark and I came up with the concept of effectively solo, meaning you're out there with a group of people, but your partner can't perform a fast, effective rescue. And we came up with 3 criteria. First, like the snowmobiler, your partner's completely out of sight. They don't even know the avalanche happened. They don't know you got caught. But we also came up with 2 other situations. One is your partner is too far away to perform a fast rescue, and the other is maybe your partner got caught also, so they have to dig themselves out, and that takes time before they can get to rescuing you. So this accident shows the second 2 examples. This is Galena, near Galena Summit, 2009, party of skiers. First skier entered here, skied all the way down, and was completely out of sight or off this slide. The second and third skiers came in together, probably hadn't even really started making turns, and they triggered a very wide, large avalanche, and both were caught. So skier 3 is totally buried. Where are her partners? Well, her first partner is partially buried, severely injured, and can't help rescue her. Second partner is way down here. She had to put her skins on, figured it took at least 10 minutes to get back up here, did a partial evacuation of this person, another 10 minutes for a beacon search, at least half an hour, and the woman, skier number 3, died. So she was out in the backcountry with partners, but they weren't effective partners at the time of the avalanche. So these are the numbers we came up with. Mark and I went through 9 years of data, so it also includes last winter. And out of the, I think it's 233 avalanche fatalities, 44% of them, the people were either alone or didn't have effective partners. And there's a breakdown for you. Okay, so out of those people, 12% were true solo, like that first fellow outside of canyons by himself. The other involved people that, a lot of those were climbers who were roped together. So we just kind of put them in an other category. And then basically in the US, 1 out of every 4 people who die in avalanches has a partner or partners, but their partners can't do a timely, fast rescue. So we thought that was kind of interesting information to share with everybody. And when you're, and just a few thoughts now for about 5 minutes, when you're solo, you gotta not just be 100%, you really gotta be 110% sure of what you're doing. And I love this illustration from Mike Cleland, from Mike and Alan's Avalanche book. And this really says it all. When you're out there by yourself, it's not even just the big slopes you have to be careful of. Even just a small benign slope, a small incident can turn out to be very serious or tragic. So this is a great illustration. When you're with partners, you know, in the last few years in education, we're really focusing, get the gear, beacon, shovel, probe, get the training, you know, make sure your partner's practiced, and this is often. But maybe we just need a little more focus of other ways to be an effective partner. We certainly hit on the, you know, ski one at a time, get out of the way at the bottom, and keep your partner in sight. But perhaps it's a little more complicated than that, and a little more thought needs to go into it. There's a lot of great techniques out there, but often things when it comes to group travel and group management, we don't teach that right away. You know, that goes for the upper level avalanche classes. You're taking guiding courses, and they've got all these great ideas and tricks. And maybe that needs to get back into our education a lot earlier for the beginners to be thinking about travel. This has a great ending. This is Jaws. This is Upper Days Fork in Big Cottonwood Canyon. It was Christmas Eve, and a party of 3 was up here and decided to ski this shot, Jaws. First person came in, did some cuts, and just tucked right under there. Second person skied all the way down and out. Third person triggered the slide, went into the trees, and was fully buried kind of mid-slope. Well, leader of the group was in the right spot, immediately started a beacon search, and then since, of course, this is the crowded Wasatch, right? We had a guy over here who was skinning uphill. He had his skins on. He came in doing a beacon search from this direction. They both honed in on the person in about 4 minutes, shallowly buried, dug them out. He had no airway. His mouth was covered with snow. He was totally blue, but they cleared his airway and he lived. And everything else on the day went right. He had 2 broken legs, but they had cell phone service. There were people to help. He got helicoptered out. So big open slopes and chutes are pretty easy to handle. You know, a lot of you have probably done this before. If there's a safe spot, somebody comes in, gets into that safe spot, and they're spotting, and that lets them be in a good position if a slide is triggered later to be able to help their partners. And this is looking back up that slide. If everybody had been down at the bottom and out of the way for them to get their skins on and go all the way back up to where he had been buried, they probably wouldn't have gotten to him in time because of that, the fact he had no airway. Trees are much, much harder to handle, right? You know, you can't even see your partners half the time. It's super simple to get separated. And setting that boundary or fence line, again, that might show up in all your guiding courses. Does it show up in your level 1s? But that could certainly help in treed situations where you sit there with your partners and you make a decision of, okay, first person goes, everyone stays to the left. Another thought for trees is you don't want to go long. You have to do much shorter shots because it's a lot harder to keep track of each other. And a couple summers ago, I talked to Bill Anderson about some of the tricks he uses guiding in trees. And he says he does plays Marco Polo. Like if he can't see all the clients, they ski a shot, and he uses his voice and tries to make a sound map of where the clients are. Radios are useful. He may keep everyone's cell phone on. So if the Marco Polo doesn't work, then you're on your phone. And he made a comment of like, how fast can you get your pack off, skins out, and skins back on? He actually practices in his living room. So he's really good at that. And he thinks about this, of where his clients are and where he is in case he had to do a rescue. When it comes to motorized, speed is a huge advantage. People on snow bikes, snowmobiles can be way far away. They can be in a safe spot while somebody's high marking, and then they can get to the last scene point in seconds. Speed also works against motorized users because they can also disappear in seconds. Really hard to keep track of your partners when you're out there and everybody's having fun and playing around on features. Mark's comment was his making the neck swivel a habit. He's constantly looking around, checking, doesn't matter if they're zooming up a road or they're playing around, just keeping track of his partners. Also, things like BCA radios, helmet radios, anything you can do to improve your communication when you're motorized. And so this is kind of a summary of the Are You Alone data. This is for the people who don't like pie graphs. I've got it in numbers now for you. So 9 years of data, 233 avalanche fatalities. 130 of those people died with a partner who was able to attempt a rescue. They died, but their partner gave them the best chance possible. You know, their partner was there, got there fast, and was able to help. That leaves 103 people. Some of those people were solo, so they had no partner. Some of those people would have died anyway, trauma, but there's a certain significant number of those people who didn't have a chance because their partners weren't anywhere where they could perform an effective rescue. So during that 2016-17 winter, looking at the statistics at the end of the winter, I also noticed that 2 out of the 4 solo travelers were going uphill at the time they died. So that just opened up the whole uphill concept for me. Christina Raspolini and Linda George volunteered to help me, and they honestly did the heavy lifting. They set up the spreadsheets and started going through all of the accidents. First thing we had to do is define what we were looking at, and we excluded motorized. So basically, with snowmobiles, when you start looking at the accident reports, with most of them, you can't tell if they're going uphill or downhill at the time of the incident. It just happens so fast. We also excluded anyone who doesn't spend a lot of time going uphill, so that's heli skiing, ski area accidents, and that sort of motorized accident. So we're looking at non-motorized, and then besides the backcountry skiers and boarders, we included anybody who spent a significant portion of their day going uphill. So that was snowshoers, hikers, and also those who maybe snowmobiled into an area and then were doing laps. So they spend a fair bit of their time going uphill, non-motorized. And so out of the 233 people, it's kind of a small subset. 9 years, we only ended up with 35% fit are touring, so that's 81 accidents that we looked at. And again, the further back, the reason we only went back 8 or 9 years, the further back you go, the worse the accident reports are. They just lack the details we needed. Also had trouble with cornices of determining whether people were going uphill or downhill when they stood on cornices. So this is what it came out as. For non-motorized users, 1 out of every 3 are dying going uphill. I never expected that when I started going back through the data. I was thinking 10 or 15% might be significant, but I think it makes us need to think as backcountry users and as instructors that that's a significant number. And, you know, my only thoughts on that is we certainly spend most of our time going uphill. So I think all of us think we're doing the safest up track possible. We're spacing out. We need to reevaluate the terrain often if there's changing snowpack conditions. Perhaps some pre-trip planning of identifying possible avalanche terrain you're going to travel through so you kind of know your plan. And again, maybe for educators in the room, those uphill fatality statistics should be included somewhere right from the beginning. So another great illustration by Alan and Mike. This is confusing. It's hard to pull this all together when you're in the field. It's hard to teach, it's hard to learn, and perhaps just some more thoughtful, proactive travel procedures and thinking about where you are in relation to your partner could supplement this and maybe a little bit easier to implement in the field. And here's a quote at the end by Dick Dorth. You can look up of troglodytes and technology online. It was a blog of his, and the whole thing is great. But he said old skier Bob Beatty gave him those 4 words, the basics never change. And Dick said he thinks those 4 words probably saved his life numerous times and why he's here today. And I think the basics never change with travel, and maybe we need to go back and focus on them just a little more and refine them to, try to stay safe in the backcountry. So thank you.
You did great. Any questions for Ed?